Testing, check, check. Hello, welcome to the Ninja Robot Studio LLC stream where I play video games and VR experiences and talk through them from a UX designer's perspective because game development has a very direct and heavy influence on XR design, spatial computing. So it makes sense that we would study games to understand how to make quality immersive experiences. So on Thursdays, when there's not IRL stuff going on, I stream on Thursdays. I try to do very regularly Thursdays at 12, but some technical issues slowed me down today, but here I am now, ready to go. I play video games and talk through them from a UX designer's perspective. So today, and what I'm working on right now is branching narrative, because branching narrative is a very important way to help people give people license and some kind of ability to have control over the story and the outcome of the game. Branching narrative enables you to do that. And it's not just for games, it's also for training scenarios. And if you want to go back and watch the rest of the videos in my series later, you can do that. There's a playlist on branching narrative on YouTube for you to check out. But so far, I have played Undertale and Wilder Myth, and now I'm working on Genshin Impact. And before each of the sessions, I just like explain really quickly what branching narrative is, and then at the end, after I've played through the game, I will go through and do a Rose Thorn Bud exercise, which I talk about what are the good things about this from my understanding and knowledge as a UX designer for XR and as a UX designer in general. I have over 24 years of experience in UX, and I follow the pillars of gaming UX as well as UX best practices for XR and general UX best practices, and go through and do Rose Thorn Bud. Roses are the things that are good about it, because we always want to identify the good because we want to learn from the good as well as the bad. And then we talk about the thorns, where these are the things that aren't so good, and the buds are what can we do about it, or what are the next steps. And we ideally have one bud per thorn for each thorn, because it's not just about complaining, it's about what do we do about it. So what can we learn from this? And then after that, I will go through, if it's a 2D game like the ones I've been playing so far for branching narrative, what do we need to think about if we were going to translate this into XR as well? And patterns is a different thing that I'm working on the side that I've had to put on hold because of time, but it is in the works. So bringing up design patterns that we can, because I'm working on a design pattern library. But I've done Wilder Myth, where I'm studying. I went through and did a side-by-side comparison of two different playthroughs of this starting sequence to see what we could learn from that. And you can also check out, there's 2 videos on that. And then Genshin Impact is what I'm working on right now. This is actually the third part of this one, and going through and talking about what can we learn as we play. So branching narrative is, if you're looking at the right browser over here, is usually like with a story, with a movie, you have a very set story sequence, and nothing you do, you can't decide anything to change it. That's a general narrative structure. However, with branching narrative, there's different types of branching narrative that this article talks about. I'll put it in the chat here. But this is String of Pearls map. This is a common one, and I would say that Genshin Impact, for the most part, follows this one, where you have a main storyline that your decisions don't really change the outcome of the story. But then you also have side quests that go off into their own branches that you can do as well. And a lot of games have that. That's the probably the simplest type of branching narrative out there. And then there are other types of branching narrative, and I would say that a lot of games like have a mix of these things in them. Um, where like Final Fantasy 14 has something kind of like this, where you have a starting point, everyone starts at the exact same spot, but then depending on what decision you have made as your starting class, like um, Dragoon or healer or whatever, you start in a different place. And then you have a branching story for that place. And then at some point it converges into the same place again. And then sometimes it'll branch off again, depending on your class. And then it'll finally come onto this ultimate branch that is the main story. And then it comes into more of something like this String of Pearls. So it depends on the game. It's not like one game is one of these types and that's it. The games that I've played so far seem to have a mix of these different types at different points. So it's more complex than what they've drawn here. But another one like Wild Undertale is this type of map of mini endings where you start at the same place, but then depending on your decisions that you make, you could have a completely different outcome of the game. Pillars of Eternity is kind of like this. And Persona 5 can have some effects like this. The overall main story is the same, but your decisions do change the outcome of like who's still there at the end of the story, who are your friends, who are your foes, and so forth. And so Genshin Impact, the main story of Genshin Impact, the main game is like this, the String of Pearls, where it's just the main story and you can't really change it. Then it's got branching side quests. But if you do some of these, there's called daily side quests. And if you do enough of these daily side quests, you unlock other quests that are what we're doing. They're called Hangouts. And these are the mini endings branch is what we're working on with Genshin Impact. Special hangout called the map of mini endings. And again, like I said before, this isn't just for games. This is also for serious games like training. And that's where my experience is, branching narrative with games, with training, because in training, the more effective training in VR has different consequences depending on your decisions. And so that is what branching narrative is. And so even if you are in this for serious applications, training, therapy, whatever, branching narrative is going to benefit you because it's going to help you create a more compelling training or experience, whatever it is that you're trying to do. So it's not just for gaming, it's also for serious applications and so forth. So don't just write it off because we're talking about games, because this very much, and I learned that very early on in my switching over to XR design, was games have a very, very direct impact on any immersive experiences that we create, including XR, like application design, because there's a different type of interaction and mindset that is with this type of hardware. So we need to adjust and learn from that. So that is. So this is Genshin Impact, and we are working on what is called Hangouts. And these Hangouts, again, you have to unlock these by playing these daily quests, and you earn so many daily quests, give you a key, and then after so many keys, you can unlock this. So these quests here require you to have 2 keys, so that you would have to play 8 daily side quests to get 2 keys to unlock these Hangouts. And we finished this one before. I didn't stream this one. This Shikanoin Haizo hangout. And so this is a good example of one that's finished. It starts out at the same place, and then depending on what decisions you make along the way, it's going to come out to a completely different story. And what I like about the UI of these Hangouts in Genshin Impact is that it shows you the branch. It shows you the branches and illustrates them for you so that you can see where your decision point was that branched off. And so this is a good example of where you can learn about maps with many endings, is because you can also see it mapped out for you right here on the screen. So like there are 5 endings for this, and we've completed all 5 endings. And also another cool thing about the Genshin design here is that you can see where you branched off, but you can actually go back and play that part again if you want to do another branch. We've completed this one, but we are working on this one with Faruzan right now. I haven't had any endings right now yet, but we see that so far we have only made one decision that branched off into something else. But we can see here visually that we have 2 other options that we could have chosen at this point of decision at this academic problem. Yeah, it's hard to do this on the PlayStation. But I've made one decision, and that is taking us off to another story. Then at some point, I can actually go back to this point of decision and make a different decision to do the other branches. I don't have to play the entire thing over again. I can just go right back to that point of decision and continue on. And that's one of the things that I really like about their Hangouts. It's all mapped out for you. It's a perfect way of studying branching narrative. It does have its flaws. Genshin Impact does have its flaws in how they've done some of this branching narrative. And if you watch the previous videos, you'll see that. But it does have some really good points as well. Okay, so let us continue. I'm still in this branch, so we're just going to continue on with this story. We have decided that we're going to help Farzan start a class because we can't get her to come help us until we've solved her problem. Yes, because we needed her help with something that I don't fully remember what, but it was something to do with research, but we can't reasonably ask her to stop everything that she's dealing with to come help us, so we're gonna help. Stream has frozen again. Doesn't look like it is changing. I've been having issues all day. Or no, I actually was fine. Everything was working fine until I started the stream. Then it started crashing. So it has something to do with OBS, and then Razer decided to upgrade all my stuff while I'm doing this. So I don't think that my screen's actually updating. Might have to stop streaming. Okay, it's updating now. It's updating now. And so you didn't see any of that stuff that I was just talking about. I did talk about it in a previous video. It is updating now. It is working now. Okay. Let me show you real quick again that branch. If you're watching this and you see issues like that, comment. I do pay attention to the chat, so comment and let me know if you're having issues hearing or seeing something. Because I may get busy talking and not notice that. So you didn't see the window share either. Let me quickly show you. This is the article on branching narrative. I shared it with you in the chat. So, yeah, sorry about that, that I didn't notice that sooner, that it was not updating. I just thought it was being slow. Let me quickly show you branch. So I finished Shikanoin Hazo again, and this is again a great example of how we can visually see the branching narrative and see how it has 5 endings and they're completely different endings depending on our decisions. And we can go back and look at our point of decision here where it branches off. And this is just really hard on a PlayStation controller, but we can go right back to our point of decision and change our decision and to play each of the branches instead of having to play through the entire thing again. And they can be pretty long, so that would take a long time and be frustrating. So they're letting you do all of the endings without having to play through the whole thing again. So we're working on Paruzan now. And we have already made one decision that branched us off. This is where I am right now. Facing a classic sure is tough. We're trying to find an old book that has strangely been edited and changed over the course of history. Somebody edited the crap out of this book and changed it. And so it's not what it was originally, how it was originally written. So it kind of basically ruined the book. So she's trying to find the original book. So we made a decision here, and we can see that we made a decision that's going off on this one trail, but there were apparently 2 other decisions that I could have made 2 different outcomes from this. There are 5 total endings, but right now we're still on our first run through. So I'm gonna continue playing here. Okay. So we're going to go to the cafe to find her. And I've been playing a different game lately, so I'm hitting the wrong controls. Another day, another empty room. Excuse me, but are you Mada? Yes, are you here to listen to my story? Well, actually, we came to ask about something else. It's fine, I'm used to it more or less, so how can this terribly unpopular storyteller help you? Right now, there's not really any branching dialogue going on. This is just a set storyline with no decisions. But at some point, we'll have some to make. Do you know about the tales of Shahryar? Tales of Shahryar. Why I can barely remember the last time anyone talked about it.
師匠はこの本は昔すごく流行っていたんだとよく言ってた。でもカフェで試しにいくらか話してみたら、その反響はアンタルの物語よりも良くなかったんだよね。
My master always talked about how incredibly popular that book used to be. However, I tried reciting a few chapters of it at the cafe, and I found that it's even less popular than The Legend of Antara.
お前の師匠
Her master.
ああ、語り部の師匠さ。師匠曰く、このシャハリヤールの物語は師匠の大師匠の師匠が書いたものだったらしい。
Yes, the one who taught me how to be a storyteller. He said that Tales of Shahryar was written by his master's master's master. And I mentioned this in previous streams, but if we pay attention to all the micro interactions going on and the visual design here, there are some design patterns here that do matter and do make a difference when you include them in any branching dialogue, branching narrative. There's a difference in narrative and dialogue, branching narrative and branching dialogue, and I mentioned that as well in other videos, but basically the difference in the branching narrative and the branching dialogue is the narrative's the whole story. Dialogue is just little conversations, and you could choose like your response to those conversations. They may or may not affect this outcome of the whole thing. But it looks like in these Hangouts, because you see the 5-star hearts up in the corner, in the right corner, is that the dialogue does affect the relationship between the player character that I'm playing and the main character of the Hangout, which is Faruzan in this case. So my dialogue does matter in this case. I don't know how it affects the story, but it does affect the relationship somehow. I'm not sure how. But there are design patterns in here. Like you see and I've talked about body language as well. You see that he is standing here in a neutral posture, waiting for a response to his conversation. And the body language and rigging of this model it's looking at whoever he's talking to, which right now he's talking to Faruzan. So he's looking at that person. He's in a neutral posture. He's still breathing. Still looks natural. And then in the actual UI, you see his name, what he does. Mada is the storyteller. And you can read what he just said. And you can do this regardless of what language. I play it in Japanese, and there is stuff that get lost in translation, which is important in how you translate your dialogue into other languages, because things do get lost in translation when you don't do it effectively. And then you'll see underneath the words this little diamond that is like has this little floating triangle in it. That these things are all important indicators, and then next to that little diamond is to indicate dialogue is done and we're ready to continue. But it's letting me manually progress by default. There is an option to start autoplay here, which I've talked about before. Autoplay is, some people want autoplay. They want to just sit back and enjoy the story. I prefer manual progression, and a lot of people do prefer manual progression because we all read and comprehend at different speeds, and there are external things in the world that can distract us from whatever it is that we're paying attention to. And this is very important for training, is you need to be able to manually progress so that they can comprehend what it is that they're ingesting, training or therapy or whatever. Manually progress it, depending on, of course, the outcome that you're trying to get from your therapy if you're doing it, but so that they can comprehend at their own pace. Different languages, distractions, all kinds of things can slow down comprehension. So we want to make sure that we give them the option. So these design patterns do matter, and I've experienced this and noticed this myself whenever designing these for a VR, that it still does matter. All of these little details matter.
それにその方は教令員の学者で、彼の書いた物語は賢者たちも絶賛するほどのものだったという。
He also said that this great great grandmaster was an academia researcher and that even the sages liked the series.
当時彼は連続で4巻分を書き上げて、それぞれが前巻よりもさらに好評を博した。スメールに彼の本を読んでいない者は存在しなかったほどだった。
He wrote 4 volumes back then, and the reviews just got better and better. You couldn't find a single person in Sumeru who hadn't read his books.
それでその後何があったんじゃ。なぜ今シャハリヤールの物語を誰も知らぬのじゃ。
And then what happened next? Why doesn't anyone know about the Tales of Shahryar now?
さあね、流行ってものは誰も予測できないから。今日はみんなこんな話が好きだって言ってても、明日になれば今度は違う話が好きになってる。
Oh, it's hard to tell when it comes to trends. One day everyone likes stories like that, and the next day their tastes change completely.
そのうち大師匠の大師匠は衝動的になっちゃってね。完結時期をあえて先延ばしにして物語を引き延ばそうとした。
And if you notice, whenever I hit confirm on here, that little diamond has a animation reaction, that matters. All of those fine details, micro interactions, feedback matter to the user experience and to the confidence that this is working the way it should and I'm doing the right thing as a user. Instead of writing a proper ending, this great great grandmaster kept trying to extend the story.
時代の流れに追いつくために新しい設定をいくつも追加していった。でもその結果、5巻以降はかえって評価が下がり始めてしまったんだ。
To tap into popular trends, he added a lot of tropes. Then, starting from the 5th volume, the reviews started going downhill. That happens with movies whenever there's a sequel.
そんなはずが。それじゃシャハリヤールの物語の結末は。
How could that be? Then what happened to Tales of Shahryar in the end?
結末？そんなものなかったよ。その後流行りに乗って数巻続けたけど、新巻が出た瞬間いつも風向きが変わってしまうんだ。
In the end, there's no ending. The great great grandmaster tried to write a few more volumes, following whatever trends were popular at the time, but the trends kept changing right as he published his books.
それで憤りを抑えきれなくなった彼は書くのをやめてしまって、自分の研究に没頭したそうだ。
He got so infuriated that he stopped writing altogether and focused on his research instead.
ありえぬ。結末が存在しないじゃと。読者は何の意見も出なかったのか。
What? So there's no ending? The readers didn't care?
その頃のシャハリヤールの物語には読者なんてもうほとんどいなかったんじゃないかな。
Aha, by that time, only a very small number of people were reading Tales of Shahryar. This feels like some manga that I've read in the past, where I absolutely love the manga, then all of a sudden some crazy change happens, and I don't care anymore. I stop reading it because it's gone so different and so weird that I just don't care anymore. Characters that I used to love, it's like, they die, I don't care now, because changed it so much from what it was, what made it good, that I don't care anymore. So your writing matters, don't just follow trends. You have to stick to a principle that made it popular to begin with and stick with that, instead of just trying to follow trends.
そもそも師匠から聞いた話ってどこまで話を盛られてるのかよくわからないんだよね。だってこの世にそれほど人気のある本なんか存在しないだろ。
Anyway, my master probably exaggerated. How could a work possibly have been that popular?
今彼の遺産として実在しているのはアンタルの物語の原型になった交渉くらいしかない。
The only tangible thing my great great grandmaster left is the original draft of Legend of Antara.
執筆をやめた後は歴史の研究に専念して多くの論文を残したんだ。僕の師匠がアンタルの物語について語るときはそこに書かれていた内容を引用することもあるよ。
He also left behind many theses from his research phase. When my master talked about Legend of Antara, he'd often quote from those theses.
師匠は僕よりずっと話術に長けていて、同じアンタルの話でも師匠が語れば多くの聴衆を魅了できるんだ。
My master is a much better storyteller than me. Even when we're telling the same story about Antara, he's always able to draw in a huge crowd.
でも、そんな師匠でも一貫性も結末もないシャハリヤールの物語を語ることはしないだろうな。
But even he won't recite Tales of Shahryar due to its ever-changing writing style and its lack of an ending.
代わりに最後まで残ったのはアンタルの物語じゃったということか。
So Antara's story is the one that lasted through the years.
まあ、物語がいいものかどうかなんて賢者ですら語れない。結局何が人気になって古典になるか答えを出してくれるのは時間だけだからね。
Well, not even sages can definitively ascertain the quality of something like a story. In the end, only time can separate classics from the fads.
時間だけが評価できるということか。
Only time.
ファルザン先輩。
Adam Farusan?
100年間。もしかしたら、わしの認めておった。
We finally have a option.
正しいものじゃなかったということか。
It's been 100 years. Perhaps some things I once believed to be great aren't so after all. You know, I think you don't have to worry about that. So this, again, I've mentioned this before, one of the frustrating things that I would say is sometimes a thorn is that this is not really an option. Because it's the same sentence. It's the same thought continued. So that's not really an option. It's making, I think the reason that they did this, and I'm just guessing, is that we have to differentiate somehow who's talking. So far we've had the storyteller and Faderzan talking to each other, but now I'm finally included in the story. And so they have to differentiate my words from other people's words. And the way that they do that is usually the player character's words, at least in this game, is up to the right above the dialogue, is where my dialogue is as the player. And so, but sometimes they will just do this where it's not really like a decision to make on what you're saying. It's more of, this is a continued thought, so it doesn't really matter which one you pick. So it just kind of would be nice if they thought, if it's one sentence, just make it one sentence. But anyway. Story's decline might not have been due to changing trends. It doesn't matter if it's a classic or a fad. What matters is that you like it. Well, I'm going to say the story's decline might not have been due to changing trends. It might have been due, in my opinion, personally, is that it kept changing the writing style and went and left what was originally what made it good. Kept changing the writing style, and that's going to ruin it. Okay, but that's my opinion. Anyway, here in the branching narrative, I think these are two different thoughts, finally, this time. I'm going to go with this one because what I know of Faderzan, I don't think the classic fad thing, what matters is that you like it, is going to matter. I'm going to go with the academic approach here because she's an academic.
そうだよ。私も最初は師匠が有名な本をたくさん探してくれたんだけど、結局その本たちは全然読めないことに気づいて。
Yeah, Master helped me find a lot of famous books at first, but in the end I realized that I couldn't get into them.
どんなにいい本でも読めないことには読み書きの勉強にならないだろう。だから私にとっては。
So I guess that decision didn't matter. They didn't bring up that point about he kept changing writing styles. So no matter how good those stories are, I can't improve my skills if I can't bring myself to read them in the first place. I think the best books for me are the ones I like. So that's Colet's thought, and now my response is, the problem here is not actually about improving your reading skills, but I suppose the principle's the same. Still a continuation of the same sentence. Indeed.
そうじゃな。読者の思考も時代の流れももともと簡単に予測できるもんではない。
That is true. Readers' interests and trends of a time are not things that are so easily predicted.
100年前の人気と100年後の冷遇。歴史にとって100年なんてあっという間じゃ。
What was popular 100 years ago could be completely forgotten in modern times, and yet 100 years, as far as history is concerned, is but a blink of an eye.
もしシャハリヤールの物語が潮流に揺らがされることなく完結まで己の作風を貫いていれば。
If Tales of Shahryar hadn't chased after trends and instead stuck to its original style from start to finish,
この100年の間に再び人気が出る可能性だってあるやもしれんかった。いや、たとえ人気が出なかったとしても、少なくとも己に走ることはなかったじゃろう。
I'm saying. But it might have stood some chance of gaining renewed popularity. No, even if that didn't happen, at least it would be a work that's true to itself.
あれ、私たち何か重い話をしてたっけ？
Well, our conversation just got a lot more serious.
何を言ってるのかはよくわからないが、道理にはかなってる気がするね。僕もアンタルの物語を根気よく語り続けないといけないみたいだ。
I don't really get what you're talking about, but it does sound sensible. Looks like I also have to hang in there and tell Antara's story well. And I'm looking at my options here. I don't like either one. Because I don't like the thought about shooting all over somebody. Then I don't know them. I don't want to shoot all over this person. You should think about the present. You should think about your income. I don't know this person. I'm not going to shit all over them. But these are the only options I have. And this is a limitation, but this is a decision point, I guess. At least for dialogue. I don't like either option. I would say something different. And that's one of the problems with this branching narrative, is that me as a player, sometimes I have to make a decision, a choice here that I don't like. I don't like either. So I'm just gonna pick one. I don't like either choice. I wouldn't say either of these. Seriously. But, fine. I'm gonna... Maybe they don't matter. But I don't like either one.
まったく危うくたかだか一冊の本に影響されるところじゃったの。教材の話に戻ろう。どうやらシャハリヤールの物語は無理そうじゃな。
How unseemly. I almost got carried away because of a single book. Well then, we should get back to the matter of our teaching material. It looks like we can't use Tales of Shahryar now. How about Legend of Antara then?
いやいや、それだって古すぎるじゃろうが。
No, it's much too old.
これさっきの本売り場で好きな本を見かけたんじゃろ。
Ole, you found a book that you liked at the stall, yes?
ああ、はい。でも、そこまでは。
Yes, but I don't
自
really...
分の好きな本を教材にせい。よくよく考えれば、読み書きを身につけることが目的なんじゃから、お前が興味を持てる本が当然一番ふさわしい。
Then we'll use that book as our teaching material. Now that I think about it, using a book that you like is the most suitable choice for teaching you how to read. This is something that I talked about. I don't remember which stream it was, if it was the part 1 or part 2, but I had talked about this was a surprise research case study, field research, and what she's doing right now is basically field research to try to figure out what book to use as a remedial teaching material for teaching people how to read. And she had gotten off into her own ideas and her own what she wanted, Faruzan, who's the teacher coming up with the curriculum, and stopped listening to the student, who's Calais, target audience. And in her quest to do what she wanted to do, Faruzan, as the researcher, she had forgotten an important thing, which is that she had started talking down about the book that Calais liked for target audience, instead of listening to her target audience and finding out why they like and what they want so that she can meet their needs more effectively. She barreled through, said what was wrong with that book, and kind of convinced Calais, okay, yeah, maybe I don't like this book. Which ruins it for Calais, and she's not doing her proper job as a researcher, which is pay attention to your target audience. So it doesn't mean just do whatever your target audience wants, because you have to come up with a solution that's going to work, and it's up to you to make a decision. But during your research, you don't go down the path of like dogging what your target audience is saying, right? You don't go dogging what your target audience likes. And then going on your own way. That's not how you do research. That's not how you design for your target audience. So it was a good little case study that is finishing up here, and she's finally realizing, you know what? After all that, maybe I should have just listened to you to begin with. Okay. Anyway.
教練員の方はまあ説明できそうな授業名をつければなんとかなるじゃろ。
As for the academia, as long as we come up with an appropriate course name, we should be able to get away with this. So now I have a decision that is actually possibly a decision. I propose appreciation of popular literature. Perhaps analysis of popular literature. I do the trick. I'm going to do analysis. Because that's academic. Maya, it sounds like you've dealt with the academia before. Let's go with that. Now then, let's return to the book vendor in a bit and buy the latest volume of this Onibudo for Calais. But if I wish to use it as teaching material, I have to read it first. Speaking of which, other than third eye of perception and illusory mirror, I also espy some unfamiliar phrases from the reader's messages at the back of the book. Such things as, even if it reminds me of my dark history, I still can't help but be drawn in by the story. And the author has written all the things that I only dare whisper into a tree hollow.
なぜ耐えられない思い出や恥ずかしい思い出を指すんじゃろうな。この100年の間で生まれた新しい言葉なのか？
Why do people use dark history to refer to awkward or embarrassing memories? Is this some slang that was invented in the last century?
もしこの100年間にわたる僕の変遷に関する研究というのも授業の目的に書けば書類の申請が通りやすくなるかもな。
If one of our learning objectives was researching linguistic changes over the past 100 years, it might make it easier to get these books approved as teaching material.
ああ、その言葉なら聞いたことがあるよ。一部の人は思春期に不幸を背負って生まれたとか、世界と戦わないとみたいな考えを持つようになるらしい。
Oh, I can tell you what that's all about. Apparently, in their youth, some people used to imagine themselves as someone burdened by fate, fighting against the world, etc.
でも大人になるにつれてそういう思い出が恥ずかしくなってくる。そうするとそのことを小説や木の鱗に託す人がいたり。
But as they grew older, they started to become embarrassed by such memories. Some would write those fantasies into novels, while others would entrust tales to tree hollows.
マトフさん、突然アンタルの物語を聞きたくなっちゃった。
Mother, you know, I suddenly have the urge to hear a story about Antara. Guessing she's embarrassed.
急にどうしたんじゃ。
Oh, why so suddenly? I think we can ignore the whole dark history thing just for now.
どんなに古い物語でも必ずそれが好きで聞いてくれる人がいるって言っただろう。さあ始めるぞ。古代の英雄アンタルといえば。
I knew it. There will always be people who love the golden oldies. Now let me tell you all about the ancient hero Antara. So that's the ending. Okay. So we've made an ending. Tales of the past remain radiant even now. Photo has been saved. And let me turn. So now let's look at this. Yeah. I've reached an ending. That is one of 5 endings reached. Get rewards. Okay, so now we can look at this branch and we can see, yeah, there weren't any more choices, I guess. It's just a set path on this one story. And we've got it. We've kept Bartazana happy. And we have our ending that we can look at now. I was expecting more to happen with that, but okay. It's because, like, we never finished the helping Inari with his problem. So we're just gonna end it there, huh? Okay. So now if I wanted to go back, the way they have it designed here is I can come back here to this academic problem, play through this part again instead of having to start from the very beginning. And then choose my other option here. I have 2 other options of pathways that are going to branch at some point into a total of 5 endings. But time is getting there, so I'm going to go ahead and stop, and we're going to look at the rose thorn buds and see if we see anything different or anything new that we've learned so far. That if you do play Genshin Impact, I do recommend that you make the decision before you even start playing the game that you don't spend any money on the game, because it can be a very easy thing to spend too much money on this game by wanting all the different characters that you can play in here. So if you go ahead and make the decision, or weapons or whatever, usually it's characters, but because you can play all of these different characters as your, like, their battle style and their skills and stuff. So if you do play it, make the decision up front. I'm not going to pay any money. I'm not going to spend any money on this game. I haven't spent any money on this game, and I am I have finished the main story so far, and the characters that I have, as long as you know how to level them and know how to update all their skills and stuff, you can play through this fine without spending a dime, penny, nothing, whatever your currency is in your country. So just make that decision ahead of time and stick with it, and you'll be able to play this game without any financial repercussions from that. But these Hangout events are very good, again, for studying how branching dialogue works. They have their good and their bad, but it's a good case study for studying. That's why I've picked it. So let's look at our Thorn Bud and see if anything has changed or anything new has come up since last. So did anything new come up this time? I'm not sure anything new came up. I know that I mentioned this, I reiterated a lot of things that I've already mentioned here, but like the roses are that they show the branches of the narrative as you make your different choices, which showed you in here that that's great. I like that they do that, and you can go back later, see your decision points, and you can also like play from that decision point to change your decision you want, which we'll do next time. But to make a new decision, see how that works. But so that's cool. I like that they do that, and you can see the endings and everything. And you can play that decision point again. Yeah, see, that's what I said. At that point, you don't have to play through the whole story. And that map updates as you play, which we saw. And it has updated, and now it's telling me where are my decision points, so I can go back and play those other ones later. And it will continue to update as I hit the different points. And it shows a map. It shows a final ending image, so I can quickly remember, oh, that ending, which is nice. I need to go find where it saved it on my hard drive so I can delete it because I don't need all that file space. So, and then handle manual and auto progression micro interactions well. I mentioned that they give you the option. It defaults to manual progression, and then you can switch it to auto progression if you want to, but there are some benefits of the micro interactions that are there for manual progression that actually makes it faster if you want to go through later again. And I talked about that. I don't remember when I talked about that, which part 1 or part 2, but I did talk about that before. Those micro interactions that if you come in here and you play these games, pay attention to the UI, to all those little nuances of those interactions. Those things do matter. People do expect them whenever you're doing a branching dialogue. That is expected. That's why I'm saying game to enhance your XR experience, because those micro interactions are expected and they matter. Game designers have figured this out. They know this works. They've done their research and they know this works, and there's a reason that it continues to be a pattern in here. So sometimes there are bad patterns that continue that aren't effective, but they're just copying other people. But this pattern for the branching dialogue, for the little dialogue boxes, is important and expected. So if you're doing dialogue boxes in XR, then you want to follow that pattern of those micro interactions. In the NPCs, I mentioned this, the rigging while you're in the conversation is well designed. That absolutely matters for XR. Your NPC rigging matters even more so in XR than it does in 2D, on 2D games, because it's in real life size, and what you would not expect. And I learned this almost immediately when I got my first project with branching dialogue, branching narrative in training, for training with consequences, and it had NPCs that talked to me as the player. And their body language, their behavior when they're talking, when they're interacting in XR is very important, because if it's off even slightly, you're going to notice it a lot more in XR because it's life size you're immersed in that experience, and it feels a lot more real than 2D. So you're gonna notice all that stuff that's wrong. And so paying attention to the rigging, paying attention to the body language, the behavior, the tone in XR matters a lot. So pay attention to that. Best case scenario, it just breaks your immersion. Worst case, it makes you feel demeaned or ignored or some kind of negative emotional effect on you, which you don't want, unless that's the point of the training or therapy. Then I would say use a psychologist to help you with your design, that you're not traumatizing somebody. And then, so deviation from the style of branching narrative that's available in the main story. Oh, yeah, because the main story is more of a string of pearls style. I mentioned that at the beginning as well. And these are maps of many endings, which is nice. And you can see all of that visually. And some of the thorns were that sometimes there's only response and then one response option, and it doesn't always make sense. It feels like some points in the dialogue options could have been thought out better. Yeah, and I kind of mentioned that today too, because I encountered it again today, that some things are being lost in translation from one language to another, and I talked about that as well. Maybe in the first part one, but this character, Partisan, is over 100 years old. She was stuck in time. And now she's released from stasis or whatever, and so she's 100 years older than the current people, even though she looks young. She's actually a lot older, and so her language in Japanese is Old Japanese. It's an old form of Japanese. However, in the English translation, it's not doing an effective job of conveying that. She's just using normal English. So it's something that really gets lost in translation. Normal modern English. And then sometimes it switches from auto progression or to auto progression with no apparent reason. That's when we get out of the like cutscenes and we're moving around in the world. Sometimes there will be some auto progression of dialogue, and it's possibly because it's happening while you're moving and it doesn't want to stop everything. It wants to let you continue. But if it's important dialogue, it's going to be missed, possibly, especially if you're not expecting that switch from manual progression to auto progression, or if you're distracted by something and you're not hearing or seeing the dialogue. So you would want to weigh the pros and cons of doing that, of having dialogue while the character is moving without that option of manual progression. And if possible, you would want, if it's possible that somebody's going to miss something important, don't put that in that dialogue that's moving. That just be extra stuff that enhances the depth of it, but doesn't really, like, it's not an important dialogue that's going to affect their understanding or outcome. Especially if you're doing training, you don't want, you want to think about that very much. Like, it could be chit chat as opposed to something very important to the story. Or very important to the training. And so for the things that are being lost in translation, I just say look into other forms of English to see if there's something that could make that more realistic. But I don't know if English changed that much in the past 100 years. Maybe it has. Read some Dickens. Talk like that. Maybe. Instead of our modern English. And then for when there's only one option, like dive deeper in the narrative creation to see if there are ways to improve those options to make it better. But there are limitations to what you can do with certain things, so we also have to understand that there are constraints and limitations. Then our creativity is what makes it better or worse. So be intentional of the placement of the dialogue boxes in XR if we're thinking about this in XR, because we want to make sure that we're not obscuring the view, and we want to make sure that we're not occluding important things within the environment and that we can still see the characters that we're talking to without blocking our view of things. So dialogue placement is very important. We don't want it to be too high up. We want it to be in the head comfort zone so that our neck isn't like straining, looking in weird positions, directions while we're trying to look at the character that we're talking to or that who's talking or whatever. So you have to think very intentionally about the placement of your dialogue boxes in XR. In 2D, it's always at the bottom of the screen where beneath the character, and that's one of the design patterns of that. But in XR, since it's a 360 experience, all of the facial world is your canvas here. You're gonna have to think about your placement. You don't want to pin it to the HUD because that's something that I see people doing. And what I mean by sticking to the HUD is placing it stuck to your viewport so that whenever you move, it moves one-to-one with you. That is super annoying and it can occlude things in the world. So one of the things that I've done in the past with projects that have dialogue in XR is if it requires me to have a response, I would have a panel that was below eye level within easy reach because I used touch. And so I could still see it was placed in space though, in front of me. I could still see the people talking and I could see their faces and expressions and rigging, but I could also still see, like without like moving my head a bunch, the dialogue within eyesight, like comfortable eyesight without having to move my head and or strain my eyes too far down and cross them. And so I could touch the panel for my response option. So if it's something that doesn't require a response, some people, I've seen some games put the dialogue in front of the character that's talking, but then that risks you missing something as you go from one character to the next if you're needing to read the dialogue, which a lot of people do. So then you just have to think about it consciously of that placement and test it with your target audience to see which one's going to work better for your target audience. And then you want to pay attention to those design patterns, like I mentioned. All those little micro interactions that are happening with the dialogue matters. It's there for a reason. It matters. So pay attention to that and think of how that would translate into XR. Game design has already solved a lot of these problems that we can use for XR. And then again, our NPC behavior has to be natural in 2D. It's really noticeable when things are off, and we want to give options. Especially, this is very important for classroom settings, second language options, and there are things that are going to distract you. And when you don't have the option for manual progression, you're going to miss important details. And that is very important and detrimental to training. Especially if you're in a classroom setting for training, education, you definitely want manual progression at that point. So I can't think of anything new to add to that for this. We're just going to pick one of the other branches and play through one of the other branches. So I can show you that, and we'll do that next time. Thanks for watching. Did anyone have questions? Put them in the chat. Thanks for watching. I do pay attention to the chat. I pay attention to the comments. So I'll give you a second if you do have a question. You can check out all my learning materials. Got a website there if the bot's working. Yep. And you can check the link tree to all the things here in the chat. And yeah, I've got links to all the things in there for online classes and so forth. I'm working on training, VR training course right now. But I have 2 free courses The training one will be paid, but the 2 courses that are on there right now are free. You can check those out and check out all the other things. And um, I will again pay attention to the chat if you want to post a question or something. Again, the link tree in there also has LinkedIn if you want to send me a question later. And I will be sure to check those out. And thanks for watching. I'll see y'all next time.